My name's Emily Lawson. I'm 32 now, and just 3 weeks back, I was serving as the Vice President of Operations at Lawson & Pierce Design, the construction company my dad had built from scratch. I truly thought I'd spend my whole professional life there. But that was before one voicemail shattered everything I'd worked for. Before I take you through this story of betrayal and the messy road to rebuilding, give this a like, hit subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that losing everything can actually be the start of something better. And hey, drop your city in the comments so I can see where our community of comeback stories is tuning in from. That afternoon, I was tucked into my favorite coffee shop in South Austin, sipping a cappuccino after wrapping up a smooth project inspection, when my phone lit up. At first, I figured it was just a quick update from the team or maybe a vendor question. But then I saw the name on my screen, and my pulse skipped. Dad, Robert Lawson. His tone was sharp, cold. Emily, the board met today. We're restructuring. Your role has been reassigned, effective immediately. You're no longer with Lawson & Pierce Design. Don't return to the office. Don't call back. Your things will be sent to your apartment. This decision is final. I just sat there frozen. Nearly 8 years of 65-hour weeks, and it all ended in a 42-second message. But deep down, I knew my story wasn't ending here. Driving back home that day felt endless. The familiar streets, the corner stores, even the skyline I'd helped shape seemed to watch me unravel. But if I'm honest, the hurt didn't start with that call. It had been brewing for a long time. That was just the breaking point. Growing up a Lawson meant living, eating, and breathing construction. My father, Robert Lawson, wasn't just a builder, he was a force of nature. In Austin, his name carried weight. Lawson & Pierce wasn't merely a company, it was an institution, a tradition, almost a kingdom. From the time I could string sentences together, I was expected to be part of it. I used to perch on the tailgate of his weathered Silverado as he pointed to rebar, concrete, and steel beams, explaining how a foundation works. See that, Em? If the base is weak, everything on top eventually falls apart. Always start strong. By age 11, I could read simple blueprints. At 15, I was running spreadsheets for site safety audits during summer breaks. He never ordered me to. Truth is, I wanted to be there. I wanted to understand every inch of the world he'd built with his hands. College was never up for discussion. I went to Texas State University in San Marcos, double majoring in business management and environmental design. I finished a semester early, graduating with top honors. Before I'd even crossed the stage, I had 4 job offers from national firms. I turned them all down. I still remember the pause in Dad's voice when I told him, I'm sure about this. Lawson & Pierce is where I belong. He didn't smile right away, but his eyes gave him away. I joined the company at 24, starting intentionally in field operations. I was first on site, last to leave, wearing steel-toed boots and a clipboard thicker than some contractors' toolboxes. I wanted respect because I earned it, not because I shared my last name with the founder. I dove into supply chains, built strong ties with vendors, and climbed the ladder. By 28, I was VP of Operations. Under my watch, we branched into large-scale commercial projects and introduced eco-focused designs, solar integration, rainwater systems, reclaimed materials. The results were undeniable. Profits climbed, our name showed up in city development plans, and we were suddenly on the radar of sustainability think tanks. But with each milestone, something subtle shifted. My father and I seemed to drift apart, inch by inch. Maybe it was pride, maybe unease, maybe the quiet truth that I was stepping out from his shadow. At the time, I believed we were building the future together. I didn't notice the fractures forming under our feet, not until they split wide enough to bring the whole structure down. I think the real turning point came when my older brother Matthew made his way back into the company. He's 4 years ahead of me, always the louder one, always quick with a grin, at least when it served him. As kids, he was Dad's golden boy, the one taken on fishing trips, the one Mom hovered over. And yet, for most of his life, Matthew couldn't care less about Lawson & Pierce. He dabbled in marketing, drifted through a few sales positions, then came back to Austin after his most recent job fell apart. Dad gave him a title, Client Relations Manager, which basically meant he schmoozed in meetings, shook hands, and made grand promises that the rest of us in operations had to scramble to fulfill. More often than not, I was left sweeping up the mess. I never confronted him outright. Instead, I learned to work around him, above him, beneath him, because that's what leaders do. That's what daughters do when they're trying to be known for their skills, not just their last name. But Matthew's shortcuts kept falling squarely on me. He'd promise completion dates we couldn't hit, squeeze budgets so tight there was no margin for changes, and when things inevitably went wrong, I was the one facing crews, vendors, and furious clients. Dad excused it every time. He's still getting his footing, he'd tell me. Not everyone works the way you do, Em. Or worse, cut him some slack, he's family. And that word family started to feel like a blade. It was a reminder that loyalty was demanded from me, even when accountability wasn't demanded from him. One afternoon stands out. Matthew skipped a pre-construction walkthrough with a major hospital client. The site sat idle for nearly 3 hours while I tore across town to salvage the meeting. That night, I brought it up to Dad. Do you know what that cost us? I asked, trying to keep calm. They were about to cancel. That was our reputation on the line. Dad didn't look up from his tablet. You handled it, didn't you? Then the problem solved. That's when it hit me, either he didn't see the cracks, or he refused to. The crews respected me, genuinely, and not because of my last name. They knew I showed up, that I sweated alongside them, that I understood both the blueprints and the deadlines. Matthew hated that. I could feel it every time I walked into one of his meetings. His voice would tighten, his eyes would harden, as though my presence threatened him. But I didn't feel powerful. I felt wedged between a father I was still trying to impress and a brother who wanted to outshine me without putting in the work. I kept showing up earlier, staying later, hoping effort would speak louder than family politics. I had no idea the very people I was protecting were already mapping out a way to erase me. That brings me to the Eastview Collective project, the one that defined me more than any other. I poured my heart into it. This wasn't just a development, it was my vision printed in blue ink across stacks of planning sheets, a mixed-use space designed to be sustainable, affordable, and truly community-centered. Apartments above local shops. Green rooftops capturing rainwater. Solar arrays cutting residents' utility bills. It was bold, it was different, and it was unlike anything Lawson and Pierce had ever tried. The wild part? Dad gave it the green light. I can still picture the groundbreaking day. The sky was flawless, cameras clicking, city leaders lined up in folding chairs. Dad stood beside me, handed me the gold-handled shovel, and told the crowd, "This one's Emily's vision. She's showing us what's next." My cheeks ached from smiling. For a moment, I believed he saw me, not just as his daughter, not as someone holding a place in his legacy, but as a builder in my own right. That evening, at the celebration dinner, Dad lifted his glass. "To Emily," he said, "who sees not only what structures are, but what they can become." The room clapped. Even Matthew managed to smile, though it faded fast. I wish I'd held on to that feeling longer, because it was the last time things felt steady. In the months after, the current I'd been riding started to drag. My proposals met quiet pushback, no matter how solid the data was. I brought in new vendors, firms with impeccable records in reclaimed materials and green tech, but they were dismissed in favor of old-school choices. Marketing for Eastview stalled. The language around the project shifted, sustainable was downgraded to optional, community-driven was swapped for exclusive residential. I told myself it was strategy, timing, anything but sabotage. Then came the quarterly meeting. I presented a plan to roll our eco-model into 3 upcoming projects, complete with numbers, market studies, and preliminary zoning approval. Before I even finished my first slide, Dad glanced at his watch. "Let's put this on hold, Em. We've got more urgent priorities." He didn't look at me once. That night, I stayed in the deserted conference room long after everyone else had gone home, the clicker still in my hand, my faint reflection staring back at me in the dark glass wall. I told myself it was just the pace, that maybe Dad was under too much pressure, that the company's growth was stretching him thin. But in the quiet, something heavier began to settle inside me, a coldness I didn't have a name for yet. This was the same man who had once handed me a gold shovel in front of the entire city, and now he'd buried my voice without saying a single word. After that meeting, movement started to happen, but not in ways I could easily spot. It began with little shifts, a one-on-one rescheduled at the last minute, a decision signed off without me, a calendar invite that never showed up. I brushed it off as admin mistakes, Rapid expansion could cause things to slip through the cracks. That's what I kept telling myself. But I couldn't ignore the lunches. Every day that spring, without fail, my father and Matthew would disappear together, sometimes to familiar vendor haunts, other times to restaurants I'd never even heard of. They stopped asking me to come along. At first, I didn't think much of it, but soon it became a pattern. And then one afternoon, I walked into Dad's office to find them laughing over something. The second they saw me, the laughter died. "Just catching up," Dad said, brushing it off. "You've got enough on your plate." I did, but suddenly so did they. Then a new name appeared out of nowhere, Gerald Brooks. I first saw it in a casual vendor update, per Gerald's review, attached to a contract I'd never approved. My stomach dropped. Gerald? Who the hell was Gerald? At the next leadership meeting, I asked. Dad didn't flinch. "Gerald's consulting with us on some expansion strategies. Old friend. Knows his stuff." No formal intro, no role outline, no meeting, just Gerald. That night, I dug into who he was. 66 years old, former senior VP at a major construction giant, retired 6 years ago. Famous for streamlining operations, which was corporate speak for slashing teams and gutting budgets. Profit over vision. Numbers over people. He had zero ties to Austin, zero history with our company, yet somehow, his fingerprints were already on decisions I'd fought for years to protect. Over the next month, his presence grew like a shadow crawling across the walls. People I trusted started quoting him in meetings. Contracts I'd negotiated were suddenly under review. My project leads were getting pulled into calls I hadn't even heard about. And still, no one officially introduced us. I saw him only once up close, a tall man with slick silver hair, crisp button-down, and the overconfident laugh of someone who'd already decided they owned the room. Every sentence was a vague declaration, every smile calculated. I tried asking Dad again, "What exactly is Gerald's position here?" He waved me off. "Just an advisor, M. Temporary. Helping us tighten things up." But I wasn't being tightened. I was being sidelined. The only person who seemed uneasy like I was, well, I shouldn't even repeat it, but one of my contacts pulled me aside. "You've been excluded from a lot of meetings, your dad, Matthew, and Gerald, almost every morning." My pulse spiked. "Meetings about what?" She shook her head. "No idea. But yesterday, they brought some guy around. Tall, mid-30s, clean cut. Gerald called him Colin." I blinked. "Colin?" She nodded. "They even showed him your office." It hit me like a gut punch. They were giving tours of my office, my space, with a stranger I'd never met. And still, I stayed silent. I needed to believe it wasn't what it seemed. But deep inside I knew the truth, something calculated was unfolding, and I was standing on the outside looking in. I tried to bury it, the office tours, the closed-door lunches, Gerald's creeping influence, but it sat like lead in my chest. That weekend, I went to dinner at my parents' house. I set a bottle of Malbec on the counter and offered to help with prep, but Mom waved me off. Dinner was fine, that tight, brittle kind of fine that never reaches the eyes. We talked about the spring weather, the neighbor's new puppy, a client Matthew had supposedly landed. I knew the numbers didn't match up, I'd seen the forecasts, but I bit my tongue. Halfway through the meal, Dad stepped out to take a call. A minute later, Matthew followed, saying he'd left something in his truck. That's when Mom leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. "Emily," she said, "you need to be careful." I stared at her. "What?" Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. "Your father's been different lately, distracted, irritable." "And Gerald?" "He's stirring the pot." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "You know about Gerald?" She nodded. "He's been over more than you have these past months. Long talks in the study. And your father, he's not well." My stomach twisted. "Not well how?" She hesitated, shook her head. "I can't say more. Just watch your back. Things are shifting." Before I could press her, the back door opened. Dad came in laughing at something Matthew said, and Mom's tone changed instantly. "How's your garden doing, sweetheart?" she asked, covering my hand with hers like nothing had happened. I tried to meet her eyes again, but she avoided my gaze, carrying the conversation into safe, shallow waters. When I left, she hugged me tighter than usual, holding on for a beat too long. It didn't feel like goodbye, it felt like a warning. I drove home without the radio on, the city lights smearing across the windshield, her words looping in my head like a steady drumbeat I couldn't drown out. And somewhere in my bones, I knew I wasn't just fighting for my job anymore. I was fighting to survive a war I didn't even know had started. After that dinner at my parents' place, I stopped fooling myself into thinking things would somehow right themselves. I started paying closer attention, watching people's body language, noticing when voices shifted, tracking which emails came late or never arrived at all. I saw how Matthew suddenly seemed to know more than he should, dropping references to contracts he'd never been in the room for, hinting at deals I knew he hadn't helped close. He carried himself like a man who'd been handed a key to a room I was no longer welcome in. Still, I had my projects, my crew, and my instincts. So, I locked in on the Willow Ridge proposal, our most promising pitch in months. It was a sustainable condo and retail project just north of downtown, designed to be walkable, eco-focused, perfect for Austin's growing population of young professionals. I'd spent weeks refining the numbers, working with city planners, perfecting renderings, and building zoning arguments. This was the kind of work that made me feel alive, strategic, creative, impactful. The night before our client pitch, I stayed at the office late, tightening every detail of the presentation. The data was solid, the designs sharp, the talking points memorized. I sent the calendar invite to the executive team, Dad, our CEO Matthew, and the planning director. The next morning, I arrived early, dressed with purpose, steadying my focus. But when I walked into the conference room, it was empty. My watch read 9:11. The meeting was set for 9 o'clock. I refreshed my inbox, nothing. Then my phone buzzed with a text from a friend in accounting. Emily, just heard your dad, Matt, and Gerald had dinner with Willow Ridge last night. I thought you were going to. Dinner? I tried calling Dad's office, straight to voicemail. I called Matthew, no answer. An hour later, Lily from planning stopped by, her expression tight. They signed a preliminary agreement, she said quietly, avoiding my eyes, without you. My hands went cold. This wasn't a mix-up. This wasn't someone forgetting to loop me in. This was deliberate. The project I had built from the ground up had been taken from me behind closed doors, and no one had even bothered to tell me. I sat at my desk, willing myself not to get up and storm into Dad's office. But I already knew the script. It was just an informal conversation, Nothing official. That line had become a shield, something to hide behind. This wasn't informal, it was sabotage disguised as politeness. And the worst part? No one acted shocked that I hadn't been in the room. People I had trained, defended, and supported were already adjusting to a version of the company that didn't include me. That night, as I locked up my office, I paused in the hallway. The walls were lined with framed photos, groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, holiday parties. My name etched into plaques, my face in group shots, smiling like I belonged here forever. Now it felt like walking through a museum exhibit of a career already over, while somewhere beyond those walls, the next chapter was being written without me. The next morning, I forced my focus onto something I still controlled. I had a meeting with Oak River Developers, one of the biggest commercial builders in the state. This wasn't just a large project, it was transformative. A full campus of office buildings built to meet LEED Platinum standards, designed for maximum sustainability and innovation. It was the kind of deal that could alter Lawson and Pierce's trajectory, and mine. I had prepped for days, adjusting projections, anticipating every question Martin Oakley, the notoriously detail-obsessed CEO, might throw my way. This was my arena. Their headquarters was a sleek glass tower with panoramic views of the Austin skyline. I arrived early, reminding myself that whatever storm was brewing internally, my skills still had value. Martin greeted me with a firm handshake. Emily, he said, smiling warmly, I've been looking forward to this meeting. I've heard good things. An hour later, we were deep into site diagrams and cost models. I walked him through our modular construction plan, showing how we could cut waste by nearly 45% and use reclaimed rainwater in all non-potable systems. His team took notes, nodding at the details. When I finished, Martin leaned back. You clearly know your craft, he said. It's rare to see someone balance sustainability with profitability so well. For the first time in weeks, I felt that spark again, seen not as someone's daughter, not as a problem to be managed, but as a leader worth listening to. "We'll be in touch soon," he added, shaking my hand. I stepped out into the sunshine, letting the air fill my lungs. I'd done it. Despite everything, I'd delivered something undeniable. I treated myself to my favorite coffee spot on South Lamar, the one with the tall windows and quiet corners. I ordered a large latte, settled into the corner, and opened my tablet. That's when my phone lit up with Dad's name. My heart jumped. Maybe he'd heard about the Oak River meeting. Maybe this was the moment he finally acknowledged my work. But the call didn't connect, it went straight to voicemail. Seconds later, the notification appeared. I hit play. His voice came through, clipped and practiced. "Emily, the board met this morning. We've decided to restructure the company's leadership, effective immediately. Your position has been terminated. Your access has been revoked. Do not return to the office. Your belongings will be sent to your apartment. This decision is final." The voicemail ended, and with it, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. There was no thank you, no explanation, no chance to speak, just a sterile erasure of everything I had worked for and given up. I sat there in the low hum of espresso machines, surrounded by chatter that suddenly sounded far away, as though I were underwater. My hand clenched around the phone. I could have called back. I could have shouted, argued, begged. Instead, I typed a single word into a new message, understood, hit send, picked up my coffee, and stepped out into the Austin rain, letting it pour over me like a baptism into a life that had no place for me anymore. I don't remember the drive home. At some point, I left the cafe, slid behind the wheel, and started moving, but the streets melted into a streak of gray. The rain tapped softly against the windshield, almost like a lullaby I couldn't wake from. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just drifted. I passed the Lawson Tower on 8th Street, the one we'd rebuilt with stone salvaged from a demolished courthouse. That design choice was mine, a battle I'd fought with the city until they agreed. A few blocks later came the old Crestview Elementary, now capped with solar panels we'd installed through a school program I'd pushed for. And finally, the Eastview Collective site, my site. The scaffolding stood over silent concrete and steel, but the signs had changed. Our promise of sustainable living had been replaced with glossy banners, luxury condos starting at $820,000. I pulled over across the street, engine running, staring through the rain-streaked glass. I didn't get out. Couldn't. I just sat there, waiting for my phone to buzz again, for someone to explain, to soften the blow. But it never came. When I finally reached my apartment, it felt like stepping into a stranger's home. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and stood in the center of the room, still in my coat, surrounded by artifacts of a life that no longer existed, a framed photo from our first commercial ribbon cutting, a hard hat with my name etched across the brim, a shelf lined with thank you cards from clients and crews. Now they felt like relics, paper ghosts of promises long broken. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the balcony, and watched the city's windows blink to life. Families were eating dinner, dogs barking somewhere down the block, music spilling faintly from a rooftop bar. And there I was, no title, no office, no plan. Not a single call from Dad. Not from Matthew. Not even from my mother. The silence was its own kind of cruelty, precise, clean, practiced, like they'd planned every step of my removal. I tried my email, locked out. Company credit card, declined. Lawson and Pierce server, access denied. Every digital doorway I'd built my career through had been sealed overnight. I finished my wine, setting the glass down with a slight tremor in my hand, not from rage, not yet, but from the raw shock of being erased. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just a business decision. It was calculated. It was personal. That night, lying in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, I finally whispered the truth into the dark: they erased me. I woke before sunrise, not because I'd slept well, but out of habit. For nearly 8 years, I'd started my mornings before dawn, reading site updates over coffee, skimming schedules while brushing my teeth. But that morning, the routine crashed into a wall. I reached for my phone, instinctively opening the company app, another access denied. As if I needed the reminder. No missed calls. No new messages. No one checking if I was all right. Not even the courtesy of feigned surprise. I thought about eating, but the idea turned my stomach. I stayed on the couch, watching light crawl across the walls while the city woke up outside. Cars rolling past, kids laughing on their way to school, my neighbor's dog barking twice before going quiet. The world was still turning, and I couldn't figure out where I fit in it anymore. Without my inbox dictating where I needed to be, the day stretched ahead like a blank page I didn't want to write on. I opened my laptop, trying to reach out to clients I'd worked with for years. Some emails bounced. Others went unanswered. And I could feel it, the Lawson name, which once opened doors for me, was now closing them. By noon, the silence was unbearable. I called my mother, voicemail. Tried the house phone, no answer. Against my better judgment, I dialed Matthew. Straight to voicemail. Each unanswered ring chipped away at whatever composure I had left. It was as if I'd died and no one thought I deserved a funeral. By the third day, I stopped checking my phone entirely. I left it face down on the counter, refusing to beg for crumbs of contact from people who had rehearsed how to vanish me. But the questions wouldn't stop clawing at me. Why now? Why like this? Who was really behind it? The numbers had been strong. My projects were thriving. Oak River alone could have fueled the company through the next fiscal year. This wasn't about performance. It wasn't an accident. This was personal, and someone had made sure it looked like I had simply walked away. That afternoon, staring out the window with a half-empty mug and a mind unraveling in all directions, the truth landed hard. They weren't just cutting me out. They were trying to rewrite the history of this company without me in it, to erase my name from every blueprint and every story that mattered. And I wouldn't, let them. By the fifth day, I couldn't stand the stillness anymore. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, it gnaws at you, pulling apart every memory until you start wondering if you ever truly belonged anywhere at all. I needed answers. I needed to stop drowning in questions that circled endlessly in my head. So I texted Lily, "Can we meet somewhere off the radar? I just need to talk." Her reply came less than 5 minutes later. "There's a diner near my place, 6 p.m. I'll scope the room before I sit down." Even that told me everything. The fear, the pressure, the way the walls had closed in so fast they'd reached her too. I got there early and claimed a booth in the back corner, angled so I could watch the door. The place was nearly empty, just a couple murmuring over fries and an older man hunched at the counter with a half-empty mug of black coffee. When Lily finally walked in, she scanned the room twice before sliding into the seat across from me. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes lined with exhaustion. "I'm not supposed to be here," she whispered. I nodded. "I know. Thank you for coming anyway." She glanced at her hands, took a deep breath. They had everyone sign NDAs about the leadership change. "We're told to route all questions through Matt or Gerald now." "What's the official story?" I asked. "They said you decided to step away, that you were exploring new opportunities and handed things off willingly." I almost laughed, but nothing about it was funny. "They fired me in a voicemail, Lily. Less than 24 hours after I closed the biggest client meeting of my career." "I know," she murmured, lowering her voice even further. "And that was the tipping point. The day you met with Oak River, that's when everything shifted. Tell me how far this goes." She checked the room again, then reached into her purse and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "It's a list, people they've reassigned, vendors they've dropped. And they've already gutted Eastview Collective, no solar, no reclaimed materials, just high-end condos. Your name's been scrubbed from all of it." My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "They're erasing everything," I whispered. "And Colin, Gerald's son, he's now vice president of operations. Matt announced it at the all-hands the day after you were gone." I went cold. "Colin. The stranger who'd toured my office before I'd even left the building. And they're telling everyone I walked away?" She nodded once. I swallowed hard and asked the one question I'd been avoiding. "Has my father said anything about me?" Lily hesitated. "Not much. Just that it was time." There was nothing left to say. The man who once hoisted me onto his shoulders at job sites now couldn't even face me. I didn't sleep that night. After Lily left, I drove aimlessly through Austin, past sites I'd led, streets where my name had meant something. By the time I pulled into my building, the first traces of daylight were smudging the horizon. I stepped into the lobby and froze. 4 large cardboard boxes were stacked neatly near the elevator, each labeled in thick black marker, Lawson Office Property. I didn't need to check the delivery slip. A courier had dropped the remains of my career at my front door like a package no one wanted to claim. I carried them in one at a time, my arms heavy with more than just the weight. With each box, the air inside my apartment seemed thicker, pressing in. The first box held frame degrees, LEED certifications, and awards, one frame's glass shattered, shards pooling at the bottom like frost. The second was full of personal bits, a mug from a former intern, a spare phone charger, a sketchbook of site ideas I'd been working on in my downtime, the pages bent and torn. The third was worse, photos of our first commercial ribbon cutting, a picture of Dad and me in hard hats at the original warehouse, a letter from a non-profit we'd rebuilt after a flood, all tossed in carelessly, without wrapping or order. And in the fourth box, buried beneath a dented desk lamp and a wilted plant I'd kept alive for half a decade, was a manila envelope. Inside was a separation agreement, 3 months severance in exchange for my silence. No acknowledgement of my years of service. No mention of my work. Just a single sterile closing line, sign and return for payment. Taped to the front was a yellow sticky note, written in the familiar, even handwriting I'd known my whole life. This is best for everyone. Dad. I stared at it, reading it again and again, as if it might change. But it didn't. He hadn't called. He hadn't checked on me. He hadn't even faced me. He'd sent a courier, a contract, and a sticky note. I let the paper slip from my hands and sank back into the couch, surrounded by pieces of a life that no longer had a home. Everything I had built reduced to boxes, labeled and shoved aside like forgotten junk in someone else's garage. Anger hadn't hit me yet, that would come. For now, all I felt was the crushing clarity that I'd been replaced, repackaged, and discarded by the very people I once believed would protect me. I didn't sign the separation agreement. Not immediately. It sat on my kitchen counter for 2 full days, untouched, the yellow sticky note catching my eye like a wound that refused to close. This is best for everyone. For who? The severance would buy time, that much was true, but accepting it would mean I'd be endorsing their version of the story. It would be agreeing that I had chosen to walk away, that I had given up. And I hadn't. Instead, I started pulling on the loose threads. I called Mia Evans, an old grad school friend now working for one of the biggest construction firms in Dallas. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but she picked up by the second ring. Emily, she said, surprised, it's been forever. Way too long, I answered. I need to ask you something off the record. Shoot, she said. Has anything strange been floating around about Lawson and Pierce lately? There was a pause, then a slow exhale. Yeah, people are talking. My chest tightened. What kind of talk? For starters, word is they're shifting almost entirely into luxury residential, full scale back on commercial and sustainability projects. Supposedly they're wooing a big private equity group too. But that's not all. I waited. I heard your name come up in a client call last week, she said carefully. The story was you stepped away because of creative differences with leadership. That's a lie, I said flatly. I figured, she replied. But it gets worse. One of your old vendors reached out to us directly. They said someone from Lawson and Pierce told them you no longer represent the company and shouldn't be contacted. That one hit like a punch. They weren't just erasing me, they were cutting me off from the relationships I'd built from the ground up. Mia and I stayed on the phone for over an hour. She told me things I hadn't even imagined, whispers about me being too idealistic, clients being quietly warned not to work with me, internal company files now crediting my projects to other team members. When we hung up, I pulled out a legal pad and began mapping it all out. Names, dates, events. Gerald's arrival. Colin's sudden appearance. The Eastview redesign. The Oak River meeting. My father's voicemail. The boxes. The NDA. And then it hit me, this hadn't been some impulsive move. It was deliberate. A step-by-step plan executed over months, designed to make it look like I had left on my own terms. On a clean page, I wrote 2 words in bold, capital letters, build back. Because I wasn't going to stay erased, not by the company I helped grow, not by a family that treated me like a threat, and definitely not by a man who thought a sticky note was an acceptable goodbye. The next morning, I folded the separation agreement and slid it into my bag, not to sign, but to bring as evidence. I had an appointment with Samantha Reed, a downtown Austin attorney who specialized in messy family business disputes. Mia had recommended her, describing her as sharp, realistic, and unafraid to deliver bad news. That last part proved true. Her office was sleek, glass walls, warm wood, every detail intentional. She greeted me with a firm handshake and gestured toward a long walnut conference table. "So," she began, glancing at my intake form, "you're the former VP of operations at Lawson & Pierce. Your father's the CEO, your brother's in the mix, and you were terminated without a formal meeting." "By voicemail," I said. Her brow lifted slightly, though her expression stayed measured. I slid the separation agreement across the table. This came with boxes of my office belongings. No warning, no prior conversation, nothing. She flipped through it, tapped a paragraph with her pen. "You haven't signed this?" "No." "Good." She turned the page. "Did you sign any operating agreement or formal contract when you joined, or when you became VP?" "I signed standard onboarding paperwork years ago, plus an ownership clause when I was promoted." She nodded and jotted something down. "Emily, family businesses, especially profitable ones, can get ugly in ways most corporate structures never do. What you're describing is what I call a soft coup, no public drama, no boardroom fireworks, just a slow erasure disguised as a smooth transition. That's exactly what happened here." "They're rewriting the narrative to protect themselves," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Exactly. And unless there's a clause locking in your position or profit share, your legal options will be narrow." She tapped the NDA again. "If you sign this, you're agreeing not only to keep quiet but to waive future claims." My stomach tightened. "What about defamation?" "They're telling people I walked away, blocking my vendors, and reassigning my work." She leaned back in her chair, considering. "Defamation's harder to prove unless you can show clear damage, lost income, documented lies, falsified records." I nodded slowly, and she gave me a pointed look. "They didn't think you'd push back. They banked on your loyalty. That's how they pulled it off." Her words landed like a hammer. I'd given them my time, my trust, my silence, believing I was part of something unshakable. But I'd been wrong. "They've erased my legacy," I said quietly. Samantha met my eyes. "Then build something they can't erase." When I stepped out of Samantha's office, Austin didn't feel colder, it felt sharper. I knew I wouldn't win this through lawsuits or contracts. But I could win another way, by making sure the version of me they tried to bury was not the one the world remembered. By the third week, silence had become its own kind of skin. I stopped expecting texts. I stopped hoping the next call would be from my mom or someone at Lawson & Pierce trying to make things right. It was as though my name had been scrubbed from every meeting, every group chat, every family memory. The money was disappearing faster than I'd budgeted: rent, groceries, insurance. I'd always been the one covering my own bills, sometimes even helping others. I had never had to count down to zero before, but now every swipe of my card carried a sting. I canceled 2 streaming subscriptions, switched my gym membership to a monthly plan, and started cooking from whatever was left in the pantry. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that something would shift, that someone would notice. But no one did. Worse than the silence was the sense that the world was moving forward without me. The company website had been updated, new headshots, new leadership bios, my photo gone. The Eastview Collective page credited Matthew Lawson and Gerald Brooks for visionary leadership. My name wasn't even a footnote. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I'd once read that legacy isn't just what you leave behind, it's what they try to erase. And mine was being deleted, sentence by sentence. Late one night, I found myself barefoot in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by the half-open boxes from my office, papers, photo frames, a cracked award still in its bubble wrap. I hadn't had the energy to unpack them. I poured a glass of wine, then thought better of it and drank from the bottle. I sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop balanced on my knees, scrolling through old photos, site launches, ribbon cuttings, smiling with clients I'd fought for, celebrating with teams I'd mentored. My father was in so many of them, arms slung over my shoulder, grinning. I wondered if he'd been planning to cut me out even then. The thought hurt in a way that had nothing to do with business. This wasn't just losing a job, it was being cut out of a family that had demanded loyalty in exchange for my silence, and I'd kept my end for far too long. At some point, I must have fallen asleep right there. When I woke, the wine bottle was tipped on its side, and soft morning light was leaking through the blinds. I felt empty, heavy, but under that, something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being silent. It was a rainy Tuesday when my phone finally rang. Not the romantic kind of rain, this was steady, gray, indifferent. I was back on the floor, still in sweatpants, sifting through a pile of client thank you cards I couldn't throw away. The number wasn't saved, but it had an Austin area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Hello, Emily Lawson?" The voice was warm, familiar, but I couldn't place it right away. "This is Catherine Walsh." I sat up straighter. "Catherine, wow, it's been a while." She chuckled. 3 years, I think. Since the Greenway housing collaboration. "Yes," I said, smiling despite myself. "That was one of my favorites." "And mine," she replied. "You ran circles around our architecture team with those cost-saving specs. You were the only developer who actually listened when I pushed for sustainable design." "Well," she said, "I'm calling because I heard pieces of what happened, and I wanted to say I'm sorry." I let out a slow breath. "Thank you. Most people haven't said anything." "That doesn't surprise me. Corporate silence spreads fast." She paused. "But I didn't just call to offer sympathy. We've been awarded a city contract for a community center in East Austin. Tight budget, tricky site, ridiculous deadlines, but the city wants it built to green standards. You were the first person I thought of." My chest tightened in the best way. "Catherine, I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. I know Lawson and Pierce had you sign a non-compete, but this is public sector, no conflict, no breach. And you'd be a consultant, not an employee." The word consultant shouldn't have hit so hard, but it did. After weeks of being erased, here was someone asking for me by name. "I'm not sure I'm ready," I admitted. "It's only been a few weeks." "You don't have to decide today," she said. "We start preliminary design in 2 weeks. If you want in, I'll hold the door." After we hung up, I stayed where I was, phone still in my hand. It wasn't just the job, it was the reminder that I was still worth calling, still worth trusting, still capable of building something new. That night, I slept without waking in a panic. And when the sun came up, my first thought wasn't about what they had taken from me, it was about what I still had left to give. The morning after Catherine's call, I wandered the long gravel path through Zilker Park. It had always been my reset spot, the place I went when the world felt too loud. The Austin skyline sat muted in the distance, softened by a low blanket of clouds. My sneakers crunched on the trail, each step buying me a little more clarity. I still wasn't sure if I'd take the project, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in weeks, I felt curious instead of numb. That's when I spotted him, sitting alone on a weathered bench by the pond, coffee cup in one hand, folded newspaper in the other, Tom Delaney. I hadn't seen Tom in more than 10 years. He'd been my father's original business partner, co-founder of Lawson and Pierce. I remembered his booming laugh and rough, work-worn hands from barbecues when I was a kid. And then one day, he just vanished. I hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Tom." His head lifted, surprise flickering before his face softened. "Emily. Well, look at you." We hugged, awkward with time but still warm. "I didn't expect to run into you. I didn't even know you were still in Austin." "Barely," he chuckled. "Split my time these days, Galveston for the fishing, Austin for the grandkids." "Sit down." We made small talk, weather, coffee, little side projects he still tinkered with, but eventually, the conversation found its weight. "You heard?" I asked quietly. "I did," he said, his voice gentler now. "Your father's got a talent for pushing people out. Been doing it since the early days." I blinked. "You too?" He nodded. 30 years ago, I co-founded that company, laid brick with my own hands, sketched plans on diner napkins. But once the attention came, money, press, politics, Greg decided I didn't fit the image. Said I was better off in the field than the boardroom. Forced a buyout and rewrote the whole origin story. "God," I murmured. "I lost more than equity," he continued. "Lost friendships, purpose, the version of myself I thought was permanent. Took years to rebuild." He paused, eyes steady on mine. "And I'll tell you this, Your father's never known how to keep anything he couldn't control. You pushed back. That's why he panicked. My throat tightened. So, you think I was right to walk away? He shook his head. You didn't walk away, Emily. You were shoved. But what you do now, that's where the real power is. I carried his words with me long after I left the park. Betrayal wasn't new, it had patterns. And once you recognized a pattern, you had the chance to stop repeating it. A week later, I was standing outside a Midris on East 5th Street, a knot of nerves in my stomach. Inside was Walsh Development Group, Catherine's firm, where my first consulting meeting since the voicemail would take place. I'd said yes to the East Austin Community Center project after 3 sleepless nights and one last conversation with Tom. Now I was walking into something new, not as a Lawson, not as a company executive, but as myself. The lobby smelled faintly of cedar and fresh concrete, comforting in the best way. The receptionist smiled, checked my name, and pointed me toward a glass-walled conference room buzzing with conversation. As I stepped inside, the chatter stilled. Catherine stood, gesturing with a grin. Everyone, this is Emily Lawson, she's leading sustainability and cost optimization for this build. A few raised brows. Not hostility, just curiosity. I took my seat, opened my notebook, and started listening. They were knee-deep in site constraints, zoning setbacks, stormwater management, and a budget so tight it might snap. It felt like coming home, the kind of messy challenge that used to light my brain on fire. When someone asked about making the rooftop functional without breaking the budget, I offered a solution: reclaimed composite panels I'd tested on a city library project a few years ago, lightweight, affordable, and still LEED compliant. The table went quiet for a beat before Catherine smiled. And that is why I called her. The conversation picked up speed. Ideas bounced back and forth. A young designer named Diego took one of my quick sketches and turned it into a 3D mock-up on his laptop within minutes. The rhythm came back to me: problem-solving, collaboration, that quiet kind of leadership that didn't need a title. By the time we wrapped, my name was on half the post-its plastered to the whiteboard. As I packed up, Diego approached me. You used to be with Lawson and Pierce, right? I nodded. Well, he said, glancing toward the whiteboard, they really messed up. The words landed harder than I expected. Thanks, I managed. Outside, the air was crisp and golden. For the first time in months, the noise in my head was quiet, not because I'd forgotten what happened, but because I finally believed this wasn't the end of the story. The days that followed felt like early spring, slow but alive with possibility. I kept showing up to meetings at Catherine's firm, and every time I spoke, the room leaned in a little more. The ideas flowed easily again, but something else had returned too: trust, not just from others, but my own trust in myself. One morning, after finishing a materials consult, I wandered into my favorite cafe on South Congress. The barista caught my eye and slid my drink across the counter before I even ordered: lavender oat milk latte, my usual. I took it to a corner table by the window, opened my laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor. A name surfaced from the back of my mind, one I'd once scribbled into the margins of a notebook and promptly buried: Green Horizon Consulting. Back then, it had been a harmless daydream, something I never spoke aloud because Lawson and Pierce was supposed to be my life's legacy. But legacies aren't inherited, they're claimed. And maybe mine didn't need to be chained to a last name that had cost me more than it ever gave. I typed, Green Horizon Consulting LLC, mission statement. The words came quickly, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. This company would put people before pedigree, purpose before profit, and hold sustainability as non-negotiable. It would be a place for planners, designers, and builders who'd been overlooked because they didn't fit someone else's idea of what a leader should look like. I thought about hiring people like Diego. I thought about mentoring the way I had wished someone had mentored me. And this time, no one would be able to erase me with a single voicemail. That afternoon, I drove to the Travis County Clerk's office and filed the paperwork myself. I didn't post about it. I didn't text anyone. It wasn't about an audience. It was about taking back ground I had poured years into and planting something new in it. That evening, barefoot in my backyard beneath the wide arms of the old oak tree, I let the cool grass ground me. The wind carried the smell of coming rain, and for the first time in months I smiled, a real one, not the brittle mask I'd worn in boardrooms. I didn't need their building anymore. I was building my own. Just a few weeks later, I found myself walking under the steel archways of the Austin Civic Center, conference badge clipped to my blouse. Architects, planners, and developers from across Texas filled the hall for the annual Urban Futures Conference. I hadn't planned to attend, but Catherine had all but dragged me into it. She even registered me herself. "You need to be seen," she'd insisted, "not as someone who left, but as someone who leads." I moved through the aisle slowly, pausing at displays for modular eco-homes and AI-driven city planning models, reminding myself I belonged in this space. Then I heard it, my name, called twice. I turned to see Peter Langston, one of Lawson and Pierce's oldest investors. The same suit as 10 years ago, the same smirk. "Well," he said, closing the distance, "didn't expect to see you here. I figured you were still on that, what was it your father called it? Extended leave." Extended leave. I kept my voice calm. "No, I'm not with Lawson and Pierce anymore." "Oh." His smile faltered. "I left months ago. I've since launched my own firm, Green Horizon Consulting. We specialize in sustainable urban redevelopment." It was the first time I'd said it out loud in a public space, not to friends or allies, but to someone who had once looked at me like I was just a placeholder. Peter blinked. "Well, best of luck with that." "Thanks," I said with a small smile. "We signed our third client last week." He nodded stiffly and walked away. And in that moment, the balance shifted, not because I'd embarrassed him, but because I didn't need his approval anymore. The rest of the day felt lighter. I ran into Diego and a few other young designers who lit up when they heard about the new company. I handed out a stack of freshly printed business cards. Every time I said I run a consulting firm, it settled deeper into the truth. This wasn't just moving forward, it was building something that was mine from the foundation up. A few days later, a text lit my phone. "Call me when you have a moment. Dad." No explanation, no apology, just the words like they'd been plucked from a script. I let it sit until the afternoon. Avoiding him wasn't strength. I'd spent too many years mistaking silence for control. So I called. "Emily," he answered almost instantly, voice thinner than I remembered. "I saw your name in the conference program. Heard you started a company." I didn't reply. He cleared his throat. "We've got a project in Lockhart that's in trouble. Your brother, he's in over his head." There it was. No hello, no how are you, just the ask. "You want me to fix what Lawson and Pierce can't manage," I said. A pause. "I'm not asking you to come back, just consult. Quietly. For the family's sake." For the family's sake. I almost laughed, not in cruelty, but in recognition. It wasn't love. It wasn't redemption. It was the same pattern, trying to repeat itself. I let the silence hang between us. "Dad, when you stripped me of my title over voicemail, when you slid my role to Colin without a single conversation, that was your choice." "I know," he murmured. "And this," I said evenly, "is mine. Nothing from him. I wish you luck with Lockhart," I continued, "but Green Horizon has its own clients now. And we don't work quietly in the shadows. Not anymore." When I hung up, I waited for my hands to shake, but they didn't. This wasn't about revenge. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was simply choosing peace over proximity, purpose over permission, myself over their version of me. That night, I walked barefoot through my apartment, the windows open, the cool Austin air brushing against my skin. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I wasn't their fixer anymore. I wasn't their safety net. I was Emily Lawson, and I was finally free. Real healing, I've learned, is rarely dramatic. It doesn't come with a soundtrack or some cinematic closing scene. It's quiet. It's waking up one morning and realizing the weight you've carried for years is gone, not because someone took it from you, but because you finally set it down yourself. It's been 9 months since that call from my father, since I said no and meant it. Green Horizon hasn't just survived, it's grown. 3 new contracts, 1 overseas project. And I walk into every meeting knowing I built this, not in spite of my past, but carrying it with me, reshaped into something that serves me now. My story didn't end the way I once pictured. There was no grand reconciliation, no perfect moment where everyone finally understood. And maybe that's the point. We spend so much of our lives waiting for validation that may never come from people who may never change. Growth isn't in the waiting, it's in moving forward anyway. I think back to that version of me, crying in my car outside the Lawson and Pierce lot, convinced I'd been erased. I wish I could lean in and whisper, "They can't take what you haven't given." Because that's what I know now. Boundaries are love turned inward. Success isn't proof for anyone else, it's permission to be yourself. And family? Family is who shows up when you no longer have anything to give them but you.